Peter Henry is the Dean of NYU Stern's School of Business, where he is also the Berkeley Professor of Economics and Finance. Henry is best known for a series of articles that overturn conventional wisdom on debt relief, international capital flows, and the role of institutions in economic growth. Henry was appointed head of the External Economics Advisory Group for Barack Obama's presidential campaign and was chosen to lead the president's transition team's review of lending agencies. He was appointed to the Presidential Commission on White House Fellows in May of 2009. Henry is a member of the boards of Kraft Foods, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the National Bureau of Economic Research, and is a non-resident senior fellow of the Brookings Institution. Henry received his PhD in economics from MIT, was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, and holds a BA in economics from the UNC Chapel Hill, where he was a Morehead Scholar. Dean Henry, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Delighted to be with you.
So what we'd like to do initially is just begin by asking each of our interviewees to tell us a little bit about themselves and why they initially became interested in economics or finance or something else, if that was the case.
Yeah, for me, my interest in economics really started when I moved from Jamaica to the United States when I was just under 9 years old. We moved from a really rural area in Jamaica where I'd grown up to suburban Chicago, and one of the things I noticed immediately was, in Jamaica, there's a great disparity in incomes. And in Chicago, pretty much everybody seemed to be pretty well off. And so one of the things that really captured my imagination is, well, why are some countries richer than others? Why do you have some countries that seem to have a kind of a prevalence of people who are well-to-do,
Sure.
and other countries there seems to be much more poverty?
So, and that began to kind of form an interest in, was it economics or was it a different field initially?
So I'll be honest, when I first went to college, I thought I was going to, I wanted to become a doctor. I wanted to go to medical school. But my lifelong interest in economics really was piqued again when I took my first course in economics in college. And I realized that the things that I love, which were science, physics, chemistry, problem solving, and mathematics, all came together in economics because I could pursue those interests I mentioned earlier about understanding why some countries grow and other countries don't with mathematical models. And for me, the idea that you could actually capture human behavior, things that drove differences in income, and understand the evolution of a whole country's economies using models that were a lot like the models we used in physics and chemistry, I found that just too intriguing and too exciting to pass up.
Yeah, it's really interesting to take it from an academic perspective, and one of the things that we try to do with this campaign is get students to think, and people around our age to think about the consequences of a federal deficit and the implications of a federal deficit. And with your background in economics and your interest in these sort of fields, do you find that this is a problem that's totally in the realm of government, or is there something that is important to everyday citizens?
I think economics is vital to both. And in order for us to have a more prosperous future, we need citizens to be engaged and we need leadership. And since you raised the question, I mean, I've just written a book called Turnaround, Third World Lessons from First World Growth, which I'll be so modest as actually I'll hold up for the camera here.
Please do.
The book is called Turnaround, Third World Lessons from First World Growth. And it's a story of what we need to see a more prosperous future. And I argue there are really three things we need. We need discipline, we need clarity, and we need trust. And we don't just need discipline, clarity, and trust from our leaders, but we need citizens, students, to hold our leaders accountable. But in order to hold our leaders accountable, we need to understand the issues. And that's why it's so important, the work that Up to Us is doing, to begin to educate young people about economic issues. And I would argue that there's no better way to begin learning about some of the issues than to actually take a look at Turnaround.
Absolutely, and I think you beat us to the punch, but we're very excited, that we have faculty here and that there are faculty that are thinking this way, because what we're very interested in learning more about is what sort of lessons can traditional kind of American policymakers take from developing economies, from third world countries, as you speak about in your book, and how can we overlay them onto the American template and the American economy and the American financial system, and can we learn from those? Can we grow from them more than we can with traditional wisdom?
No question. I think one of the big lessons that comes out in the book that I think we can, so if you look at our situation currently, and the situation not just in the United States, but generally in advanced nations, we look a lot like third world nations looked 35 or so years ago. High debt, as you mentioned, the fiscal issues. High debt is largely a result of fiscal irresponsibility to some extent. High debt, slow growth, and lack of direction. Third world nations were able to turn themselves around and become emerging markets, the emerging markets that are driving global growth, by exercising what I call discipline. And the key thing, I think the key lesson we can learn from emerging economies is that discipline doesn't mean taking extreme measures. So discipline doesn't mean crash dieting or binge eating. It means finding what I call the discipline or the long road to prosperity that is healthy habits practiced consistently over a lifetime. I think that's a message that, or a lesson that students can understand. You can't walk into a final exam not having done the work over the course of the semester and perform well. You can't deliver a prosperous future without savings and investment. And savings and investment is not just, it requires everybody to be focused on preparing for their future. It requires governments to implement the kinds of policies that encourage savings, but it also requires ordinary citizens like you and me to hold our leaders accountable, to give us policies that are going to drive long-term prosperity.
So you spoke about discipline as one tenet that possible U.S. markets could adopt and policymakers could adopt. And there are two others, if memory serves, clarity and trust, that you discuss
Yes.
in your new book. Can you tell us a little bit more about how those play in?
Absolutely. So clarity. Third world countries turned around their economies and became emerging markets once their leaders showed clear commitment to a change of direction, from the kinds of policies that really hindered these countries from growing in the 1970s and early 1980s. So we need clarity. What direction are we going in? So we need our leaders to chart a clear course, right? So in the case of the United States, it would be what is going to be the clear path to deficit reduction and fiscal sustainability. And importantly, discipline tells us we don't need to get there immediately. We don't need to have cold turkey policies, austerity policies, in which we immediately reduce the deficit. But we need a clear path for gradual deficit reduction that's responsible, that allows the country to grow and grow its way out of debt problems. And trust. Citizens need to trust their governments, and governments need to trust each other. There's a lot of talk about deficits right now, fiscal deficits, and that's very important. But one of the points that I think is often overlooked is I think one of the most important deficits right now is one called the trust deficit. Emerging economies have emerged and are growing and driving global growth, but they feel as though the advanced economies, advanced countries who taught them the lessons that they needed to learn back in the 70s and 80s in order to start growing, the advanced economies and advanced countries need to step back and become students now, and need to reciprocate, listen, and show that they too can learn from the emerging economies who are now setting the example of what discipline looks like. And until emerging economies feel that kind of trust, are recognized for the progress that they've made, everything from negotiations with respect to free trade agreements, to representation of the IMF and the World Bank and the major meetings of the G20 that set international economic policy, until emerging economies feel that kind of trust, we are putting in jeopardy our future for shared prosperity. Why? Because governments in emerging economies need to continue to stay on this disciplined path in order to promote growth. But that's not an easy road, and they need the support of their own electorates in order to do that. But when those electorates see that advanced nations are telling emerging economies to do as they say, not as they do, it makes it very hard for them to continue down that disciplined road. So we need trust.
Absolutely, and it's really important, I think, and up to us, NYU is all about promoting also fiscal trust. Just last week we had Professor Jonathan Haidt speak about the bipartisan deadlock in Congress, and he spoke about a similar concept of a trust deficit. And one of the reasons that we find that amongst the group of students who are our age and amongst kind of average citizens in general, we find that there's a sort of binary divide in terms of how people decide to view the deficit. Republican-leaning people typically look at cutting entitlement programs, whereas Democratic-leaning people look at raising taxes. the problem with that is that it might not be such a black and white issue, and that kind of ideological feeling towards the issue may actually stymie progress. So one of the things that you do in your book is you actually look at kind of objective stock market analysis as a means of kind of investigating what policy measures are best. And can you tell us just a little bit more about what the numbers say?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to do that. So what the numbers say, so let's use the fiscal debate. That's a good example. So as you pointed out, there are two polar views. One view says, we need to pursue austerity. The other view says austerity is a bad thing. The point is, there's a wealth of data over the last 35 years to study that tells us something about whether cold turkey or austerity measures work. And the stock market, because it responds to current policies and forecasts whether those policies are going to create or destroy value in the future, is a great barometer for understanding whether the kinds of effects that certain policies will have, like fiscal policy. So if you look at the history of third world countries and their experience with implementing big changes in fiscal policy, what we learn is the following thing. When inflation is a major problem in the economy, cold turkey or fiscal austerity can be a very effective measure for getting rid of inflation and stabilizing the economy. The stock market responds very positively to fiscal austerity measures implemented during high inflation. When inflation is not a major issue, when inflation is moderate, and by economist standards that means anything below 40%, fiscal austerity the stock market responds very negatively to fiscal austerity. So that basically tells us, if we look at our current situation, that in a low inflation environment, pursuing fiscal austerity is not disciplined. And that really points us back to a more moderate approach, which is to say we need some combination of spending cuts and tax increases along the lines of things that were originally recommended in the Bowles-Simpson report to get us back on a path of sustainable public finances.
Well, Dean Henry, thank you so much. Again, we're very excited about your new book, Turnaround: Third World Lessons for First World Growth, and we very much look forward to hearing more from you. I'm sure we will.
Thank you.
Thank you
very
so much. That's great. Thank you, Dean. We appreciate it.